All right, I'm going to go over some GED social studies questions. These are actual questions from the GED's own study guide. I've removed the answers so that you can try to take this as a quiz yourself. The link is in the description, and you should definitely do it first before you listen to me ramble on about how to think about each of these questions to get the right answer. All right, so let's begin. Let the rambling begin. All right, first thing I'm going to do every time, read the question first. What concept is a main idea of this excerpt? Well, main idea questions are the cornerstone of GED questions in social studies, in language arts, in science. So I'm sort of expecting a lot of these sort of things. The excerpt is from the Declaration of Sentiments presented to the Seneca Falls Convention by Elizabeth Cady Stanton in 1848. That's sort of the most useful bit of information for me right there, is that it's old. So it's going to be a little bit difficult to read, is my expectation. And if there's a main idea question, there's really no way around it. I'm going to have to read the whole thing. Although there are some places in a text that usually are more likely to show me what the main idea is. And those parts are usually topic sentences, introductory sentences, basically the beginnings or the ends of things. So we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. This may or may not ring a bell with you. It's a very close approximation of one of the most famous documents in American history. And if you don't know that, that's okay. You can still read this and figure it out. So I'm going to go through this and I'm going to look for the wrong answer. I'm going to use process of elimination to get rid of the ones that don't work. So you do need to sort of know what these words mean or be able to figure them out. Nationalism is, if you don't know, maybe you can recognize that the word nation is in there, and it's one of the isms, so it's something you believe in. It's basically you believe in your own nation. It's like being patriotic. It's like feeling like you are part of a country. Does this do this? It doesn't really do it directly. It seems like it's talking about rights. They are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. And then it talks about what these rights are. Nationalism would be more like, we're American, we're all American, let us be Americans. I say that because this Seneca Falls Convention happened in, I think, New York State. It was in America. Nationalism doesn't seem right to me, so I'm going to go on to the next one. Natural rights. Well, we just saw them talking about rights, and then they talk about specific rights, like the right to life, the right to liberty, pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, that's another kind of tell also when it comes to main idea questions. You can see stuff at the beginning, in the introduction, or you can see things that are repeated over and over. Those are clues that this might be the main idea. And I see rights twice there, and I see rights here. My guess is that's going to be the right answer, but let's see if there's a better answer in C or D. Imperialism. Maybe you know what imperialism means. Maybe you don't. I'm going to skip it and go back once, see if I can at least eliminate D if that's wrong. Majority rule. They do talk about government, and they talk about government becoming destructive to the ends of those rights, but it doesn't really talk about majority or minority anywhere in here. It might be implied, but it's definitely not as strong an answer as natural rights. So if I didn't know what imperialism meant, and I did know natural rights, I could at least get a 50-50 shot of B or C. And one of the, if I didn't think natural rights was great, I'd go with imperialism. But I do think natural rights is great, so that's going to be the answer. Imperialism is like when your country decides to like bully other countries, is basically what it is. And that's definitely not in here. It's not talking about any other countries except for its own country. The answer here is B. On to number 2. Obama's excerpt. Okay, so first thing again, read the question. Based on the excerpt, which phrase identifies an unstated purpose of President Obama's speech? So he's not gonna come right out and tell us his purpose. Sometimes they don't use the word unstated, they use implied. The opposite of implied is explicit. You'll see those words show up on the social studies test pretty commonly. All right, so we read over all of this, and for main idea, the purpose and main idea are like brother and sister. They're not the same, but they're very close. So I'm going to look again at the beginning to see if there's any clues that will point me in the direction of a right answer. Our democracy is threatened whenever we take it for granted. Okay, so it's going to be something about our democracy and sort of the dangers to that democracy, what we're doing wrong, or maybe what we could do better is where this is going, and that's sort of what it turns out to be. He sort of complains about voting rates. People don't vote, basically, is what he says here. We don't trust our institution. We don't trust our government. Our government, Congress, is dysfunctional. So he's sort of like ragging on our own government and what we're doing and how we're sort of interacting with it and maybe what we can do better. So I read all this. Now I'm going to go through and look for the wrong answer. To encourage support for the incoming administration. This is a farewell address. If you know anything about recent American history, you know that the president after Obama was Trump, and to say that they were not friends, I think, is a bit of an understatement. So maybe that background information can give you some clues that it's not going to be like everyone loved Trump. Which is basically what A is sort of suggesting here. And even if you didn't really have that in your mind, you can still get that answer right. You can still recognize that it's the wrong answer. Because encouraging support for the incoming administration, he's doing something deeper here. He's doing something more basic, at a basic level, about the idea of government. When he talks about accepting the responsibility of citizenship, that's not sort of, the responsibility of citizenship is not to like support who's ever president. It's to sort of participate in government. All right, so it's not A. To gain support for the newly elected members of Congress, same deal. It's not to support the government. That's not just what he's talking about here. To sort of like blindly pledge your allegiance to who's ever in power. To convince his audience to actively participate in government, that sounds stronger. I can't tell you why that's wrong, certainly. So I'm going to leave that in the maybe pile. To convince his audience to be honest when dealing with the government. Okay, so these two, I think, are the two strongest answers. A and B are definitely wrong. So we have it down to 50-50 again. There's something in the back of my head that's telling me that's not exactly right. Because he's here sort of, he puts the responsibility on his audience, on citizens, on people who vote, that they need to be honest with the government. And it doesn't really seem like that's his main message. Taking it for granted doesn't mean you need to be more honest. It means you need to be more active. That's why the best answer is C. All right, on to number 3. Which statement is an opinion from President Bush in his 1991 speech? There's a lot of these questions too, which there'll be questions, you might not see the word opinion, you might see the word bias. Familiarize yourself with that word. It's first cousins with the word opinion. So let's go see which ones we can eliminate. So 3 of these are going to be facts, and 1 of them is going to be an opinion. Let's see. The United Nations, with the full support of the United States, has already tried to peacefully pressure Iraq out of Kuwait. Is that something that we can check? Is that like a thing that might have happened? Yeah, it is. If he's lying, we can see if he's lying because we can check the record. So that means this is true, and it's not going to be the right answer. It's not an opinion. Our own economy is suffering. That sounds like a little opinion-y. There's no statistics. If he had said something like unemployment is up 6%, that's definitely a fact. But our economy is suffering is kind of an opinion. The effects of higher oil prices stemming from Saddam's aggression. Okay, that makes it a little closer to a fact. That's kind of on the fence here. Our own economy is suffering the effects of higher oil prices. So it's not really, if you stop the sentence there, opinion. But if you keep going, he's basically just saying oil prices have gone up. And that is something you can check. That is a fact. So we'll keep this in the maybe pile, but it's not super strong. Economic sanctions are taking a toll, but they are still not forcing Saddam out of Kuwait. Can we check to see if Saddam is out of Kuwait at this point? Can we look at sort of like economic indicators to see the toll that economic sanctions are having? Yeah, we can. This seems pretty facty to me. We have seen too often in this century how quickly any threat to one becomes a threat to all. That seems like something you might be able to back up with facts, but it itself doesn't feel like a fact to me. It's a claim, it's an opinion. Um, it's sort of like you should all be nervous about what's going on in Iraq. That's sort of what's implied in this statement, and it's not a fact. And in fact, if you really get down to it, you really carefully look at the language here. We have seen, that's his claim. Have we seen? I don't know. That's not something you can really verify. I don't know. I was alive in 1991, but have I seen that? Meh, I don't know if I have. That's your opinion, Mr. President Bush. So this one is okay, but this one is definitely an opinion. So the answer is D here. I'm going to pause just for a second to just point out that as I go through this, when you take a test like this, a GED test, there are very infrequently slam dunk answers. You're usually working in percentages, like what's the best answer from these choices. So don't feel bad if the right answer doesn't jump out at you. Sometimes it will, but often it takes work to sort of like really narrow it down and use critical thinking to get to the best answer. All right. Question first, number 4. How does Hamilton's essay differ from Madison's letter? Okay, so we're going to need to read both of these, the Hamilton thing and the Madison thing here. And I'm going to assume you did that because you followed my instructions and did the test before you listened to me talk about it. Or you're pausing and you're reading them yourself. All right. Only Hamilton suggests that governments might abuse power. Well, all I'm looking for is something to prove this wrong, so I know that this is not correct. If there's anything I can find in Madison that suggests that governments might abuse power, or I look over this and there's nothing in Hamilton that says governments might abuse power, then I know it's wrong. And in fact, I found it. The threat may occasionally come from government. It's not his main idea, but he does suggest that governments occasionally might abuse power. It's not like a direct one-to-one, but it's pretty close, so I know that it's not going to be A. Only Hamilton argues that no other constitution guarantees of individual liberty. It seems like a typo here. The word of I don't think should be there. But does he talk about other constitutions in here? No, he doesn't. And neither does Madison. Neither of them really talk about other constitutions. In fact, fun fact you may or may not know, at the time of writing, when they were writing this in the 1700s, there was no other constitution. The United States Constitution is the oldest constitution in the world. So there was really nothing to compare it to. You didn't need to know that to recognize, though, that Hamilton doesn't really talk about other constitutions. Only Hamilton says that a Bill of Rights is acceptable. Whoa, wait a minute. We already know that's wrong. This whole thing is about how it's unnecessary. There's nothing in there where he says it's acceptable. So C is wrong. We know the answer is going to be D. We're going to read it just to make sure it sits right in our stomachs, but let's go. But we feel pretty confident because these three are pretty damaged, pretty weak. Only Hamilton says that a Bill of Rights would damage the safeguards of liberty proposed in the damage the safeguards of liberty the proposed constitution. There's a bunch of typos, and I just copied and pasted this from the GED's own study guide. So somebody did something wrong. I should take responsibility. I should have spell checked and edited and copy edited this. My bad. Okay, but you get the idea. Does Hamilton talk about how it would damage the safeguards of liberty? Yeah, he does. That's basically what he's talking about. Why state that there is freedom of the press when the government is not given power that can be used to violate freedom of the press? So basically, like if we have this Bill of Rights, all it's going to do is make it weaker. Your freedom of speech that you think you have, well, the government never had any right to take away your freedom of speech. So by saying that you have it, it's sort of like his argument is kind of bad, and I'm glad the founders of this country didn't listen to him. As an American, I like our Bill of Rights. Most people do. But this is the only answer that's left standing. These three are bad, and this one is good. So D. A recent magazine article examined the government of the United States during the first decades after independence from Britain, which quotation from the article allows a reader to infer, there's that word, it's unstated, but it's there, that the power of the U.S. government is limited. This is one of those where the right answer should jump out at you. This one is pretty obvious. Let's go through them. A fear of tyranny led to the creation of a national government under the Articles of Confederation, which lasted less than a decade. Does that have to do with limited government? I don't see it. It's not obvious to me. That's pretty weak. As a result, the founders drafted the U.S. Constitution, which addressed weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation. Again, it's not like, if it's there, it's like really indirect. And it also assumes, if this is the right answer, it assumes you know a lot of background stuff about the Articles of Confederation and the U.S. Constitution. And if you do, great. This test will be easy for you. If you don't, and most people don't, most American citizens don't, certainly most Canadian citizens don't. And Canadian citizens are the other ones who get to take the GED. But, well, anyone can take the GED. I should make that more clear. But the GED won't ask you a question that requires you to have background knowledge, historical background knowledge. Sometimes there might be a vocabulary word or two, but if this is going to be the right answer, I don't know. This is a pretty weak connection. It's not obvious to me, and if there is a connection buried deep in the history of the Articles of Confederation, that is not going to be the answer on a GED test, because they give you all of the tools you need to get it right. The U.S. Constitution, ratified over 200 years ago, greatly changed the relationship between the national and state governments. It's better than A and B. Say maybe, but it doesn't jump out at me as being right. The U.S. Constitution included safeguards to protect individual rights against abuse by the government. Oh, how about that? Limiting the power of the government and then protecting individual rights against abuse by the government? That seems like a one-to-one direct connection. The answer is going to be D. C is okay, but changing the relationship between two kinds of government really isn't about limiting government. Government has to do with limiting its power. You limit its power between its citizens and itself, not between one part of the government and another part. Usually, typically. D is definitely, this is one of those slam dunk ones. All right, which event in the passage happened second? I have real trouble with this question because the question is to me, a little blurry. Does it mean of these four choices, which happened second? If that's the case, it's very confusing, but that's not really what it's asking. It's basically asking, look at the passage and then look for the second thing that they talk about. After President Lincoln's assassination in April of 1865, well, that's the first thing they talk about. President Andrew Johnson and the radical Republicans in Congress battled for control of Reconstruction. So that's going to be our answer. We're looking for something that talks about Andrew Johnson and the radical Republicans in Congress. Civil and political rights were granted to African American men? No, that happens at the very end. That's the worst answer. It's not A. Radical Republicans in Congress took control of Reconstruction. Well, that does talk about radical Republicans, so maybe, but I don't know. That it does actually say later that enough radical Republicans had been elected to Congress to override his veto. So that seems like that's not the second thing. That happens later. President Lincoln proposed no, President Lincoln was dead. The first thing was his death, so it's not the second thing. Radical Republicans and President Johnson disagreed over Reconstruction policies. Does that seem like that? Yeah, it does. It seems like a pretty solid answer. So the answer here is D. Which publication is the best example of propaganda? Okay, this is a word like bias, like infer, that you can expect to show up. It doesn't show up as much as bias. Bias you definitely need to know. Unbiased, impartial, those are like the opposite of biased. You should know those two. But propaganda is This question is really easy if you know what that word means, and it's really hard if you don't. Propaganda, you can Google definition if you want, or you can listen to me. Propaganda is media, so pictures or videos, that a government makes to manipulate its people into doing something, usually during a war, to get the citizens of a country to kind of hate the other side so that they want to do patriotic, nationalistic sort of things, support the war effort. That's usually when propaganda comes up. But there's other ways that the government manipulates its people. So, which is an example of this manipulation? A website that lists the federal taxes paid by individuals at different income levels. Nope, that's not the government trying to manipulate its people into something. It's just a bunch of facts and figures, economic facts and figures. A newspaper article that quotes a senator who argues that federal income taxes are too high. That is sort of the government trying to change the opinion of people, but it's not using images or videos. So this one is okay. If nothing else is good, that's going to be our answer, but let's see if there's something better. A wartime cartoon that claims American citizens who fail to pay taxes are helping the enemy. There it is. Cartoon, so it's a visual image. It's like in support of the government, trying to get you to pay your taxes, because if you don't, you are helping the Nazis, basically, is what this is suggesting. That sounds like propaganda to me. A pamphlet written by a socialist group that describes the history of taxes on wealthy American citizens. No, that's not really, it's just, if it describes the history of taxes, I mean, the socialist group presumably has an agenda of their own, but it's not really about the government exactly. And this one is okay, just like B is okay, but C is such a slam dunk, it's got to be the right answer. All right, on to the next question, number 8. Which statement represents a cause and effect relationship? Well, this is kind of like the what happened second thing. We're looking for something that is direct. One thing and then another thing happened directly. There's going to be a lot of these. I'm expecting there'll be some connection, but is it a cause and effect connection? If somebody punches my nose starts to bleed. That's like directly, that was weirdly violent. How about I bite into a very delicious apple and then I say, okay, that's wow. I might want to have a conversation with my therapist about something. But anyway, cause and effect is a direct connection. That's what we're looking for. So, A, because the colonists refused to pay the new taxes, they prepared for war. Does one thing cause the other? Maybe. It says that they were outraged. They were expected to bear the cost of a war that started in Europe. They protested. Ooh, that's one strike against it, because preparing for war and protesting are very different. And then some refused to pay taxes. In response, they sent additional soldiers. Tensions increased. There's actually quite a bit of space between colonists refused to pay taxes and then they prepared for war. So that's not a bite an apple, say, kind of situation. That's something else. Okay, so it's not going to be A. But because Britain had accumulated war debts, it imposed new taxes on the colonists. All right, well, let's look. The war increased British debts. To help pay these debts, they placed new taxes on the colonies. That seems like A and B. That seems like they are pretty direct cause and effect relationships. So that one's pretty strong. B is pretty strong. Because they had fought in the French and Indian War, colonists refused to pay taxes. Again, is this right next to each other? It says here they had fought in the war, but then some had refused to pay taxes. That's after the British government raised taxes. So that's not a direct connection either. You can't get from the first part of this to the second part without the British raising taxes. So this is not a direct cause and effect relationship. because colonists protested the taxes, British soldiers fired on them at Lexington and Concord. Wow, that would be crazy if you got shot for not paying your taxes. That's not what happened. There's a lot of things. They exchanged gunfire. There were weapon stockpiles. There was a lot of things had to happen. This wasn't a direct cause and effect relationship. The only one that's like direct cause and effect is going to be B. All right, and finally we get to the last question, which is kind of a math question. What is the range in the population of the 5 urban areas? They even let you use a calculator. To get this right, you need to know what range means. And if you do, great. And if not, it's going to be the biggest minus the smallest. It's sort of like the distance between these numbers, the biggest population and the smallest population. If you put it into words, you could think of it as what is the difference between the Tokyo population and Sao Paulo, or you can just, and difference in math language means subtract. So if you subtract this from this, you get this. I'm not going to actually teach you subtraction here, and you have a calculator anyway. All right, that's it. That's how you should think about social studies questions. I hope this was helpful, and if you have stopped listening 15 minutes ago, 1, I don't blame you, and 2, I hope at least that you have tried this for yourself to give you extra practice on what real, authentic GED questions sound like. As I do in every video, I encourage you at the very end to subscribe to my channel and get more great content like this. And like videos and tell your friends, and et cetera, et cetera. All right, good luck.